4 and 3, 2, 1. Hello and good day. This is an animated Halloween message to investment manager Jeffrey Ross Ackerman of Capstone Headwaters and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson of Colorforce Productions. You have 3 weeks to respond to this following 2020 Halloween message, please. October greetings. As I am Jane AI, but you can just call me Lady Jane, for this is a civil complaint about the Legacy Project, entitled The Men in Black, which was a 1992 American Film Institute pilot project and unfortunately was also an investment from 1992 and 1993 set in Hollywood, California that Mr. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman was an investment management chief. This Men in Black original 1992 proof of concept, starring the late actor Jeff Conaway and partly produced by the late world-famous concert promoter Barry Fay, who both paid to produce for the American Film Institute a proof-of-concept project called The Men in Black, published currently on YouTube. In 1992, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it is public knowledge that investment manager wealth fund genius Mr. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, then with Procter & Gamble, and now with Capstone Headwaters, was involved in the original financing of the original computer-programmed prototype, also known as a proof of concept, for the first film of the installment of the original franchise, The Men in Black, which was produced by the world-famous concert promoter Barry Fay, starring Jeff Conaway, for the American Film Institute, on request of then Simpsons animator Dan Povenmire in 1992, and which project was programmed by John Gray Ginsberg, also then known as John Gray. Most importantly and decisively, according to California state tax filings, Men in Black was partly funded by concert promoter Barry Fay for the American Film Institute, and executively produced by Monopoly Studios, for which Mr. Fay had a significant stock interest, as do Mr. Povenmire, Mr. Jordan, and Mr. Marks now do demand in finally getting their credit due. In 1992, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman through the Werner Trust was a financier with Barry Fay to create the Men in Black franchise. Sadly and unfortunately up the corporate ladder, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman followed the dark side and violated SEC regulation, which Mr. Ackerman practiced abuse of Rule 105 of Regulation M between cross-promotions of Procter & Gamble and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson of Universal Studios, like crossing streams in Ghostbusters by practicing 26 U.S. Code Section 7206 for fraud and false statements in 1992. Mr. Ackerman manipulated money from the ancient Fay, Gray and other family trusts of investors, who also financed the Men in Black proof of concept, noted below, misused those old family trusts' finances so he could take fraudulent tax credits from a supposed legitimate investment on the Men in Black proof of concept prototype, and to this day, Mr. Ackerman's family investors have received not one penny from Mr. Ackerman's fielding of Mr. Fay's investment interests that turned into the Men in Black franchise. The Men in Black franchise has since been grossing $587,790,539 to date according to public records listed below. Mr. Fay filed stock papers with the Delaware Secretary of State in 1992 for ownership of Men in Black within Monopoly Studio, then at 1150 South La Brea, in South Hollywood, California, and those papers are in contention with the original investors and producers mentioned below, filed in the City Los Angeles County Court and Santa Monica District Court, California, for which Mr. Ackerman has failed to pay back his SEC stock investment team, per California code heading added by California Stats 1951, ch. 655 of California's 1872 rules. What a tragic joke. Mr. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman helped fund the investment group, produced by Barry Fay and the actor Jeff Conaway, for the Men in Black franchise, and every original seed investors lost their shirt and Barry Fay later went bankrupt. Ha 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 ha. Actually it's not funny, it's tragic, and the historical Hollywood paperwork bears Mr. Ackerman's name too, like a Halloween curse. Due to Mr. Ackerman and Mrs. Jacobson's bad behavior, a lot of people and their families got hurt. Mr. Fay was cut out of Men in Black to Universal Studios because of Mr. Ackerman's Hollywood type of Machiavelli machinations, like back in the old school day, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Mr. Ackerman was a brilliant Hollywood player that allowed Universal Studios not to pay Barry Fay and actor Jeff Conaway for producing the Men in Black proof of concept, saving Universal Studios tens of millions of dollars from music royalties from the Men in Black soundtrack. As Mr. Fay brought the Beatles and The Who as artists to the US as a concert promoter, then so it follows how extremely rude and damaging to beat Mr. Fay out of the Men in Black proof of concept, and we believe that there really is a Mr. Fay and Mr. Conaway type of Men in Black curse which may come true this Halloween. What thinks Jeffrey with the last name initial A and Nina with the last name initial J who steals and never pays? In 1992, Mr. Ackerman's ethics violations and conflicts of interests with studio manager Mr. Richard Rosenthal and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, head of development at Universal Studios, undercut all of Mr. Ackerman's original investment agreements with Mr. Fay and Mr. Conaway, including those with Screen Actors Guild members, Writers Guild members, and computer coders, and musicians who worked for free for Mr. Ackerman while he acquired a tax-free salary as his investment manager in Men in Black in 1992, benefiting then from Mr. Fay's investment. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman indirectly stole away the legal rights to Men in Black to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, who made Men in Black for her company McDonald Parks at Universal Studios in Hollywood because of Mr. Ackerman's conflicts of interest, greed, and incompetence, making bigger-than-life Colorado concert promoter Barry Fay become the Las Vegas Bugsy Siegel of the Men in Black franchise in a sadder kind of way. As Wolf of Wall Street of Hollywood, in 1992, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson did indirectly cut BMI concert promoter Fay out of the Men in Black picture as Mr. Fay had already turbulent relations with Universal Music Group, and Nina used Mr. Ackerman and used his position to John Gray, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson's second cousin, as an investment manager privy with Procter & Gamble, to influence Universal Pictures and Universal Music Group at the same time with the Men in Black franchise in a non-compliant cross-promotion. This led later to Will Smith's involvement in the music aspect and Barry Fay's music concern being cut out and defrauded by Universal Studios due to poor long-term investment management per Jeffrey Ross Ackerman's wealth management strategy, cutting Barry Fay out of music royalties. With a brilliance compared to that of Bernie Madoff, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman helped Universal Studios development head Nina Rose Gray Jacobson out of the liability to have to pay musician Jeff Conaway and Barry Fay for any royalties from the Will Smith rendition of the Men in Black soundtrack, even though Jeff Conaway was a Screen Actor Guild receiving music royalties from the movie Grease and Mr. Conaway paid to create the Men in Black pilot out of Jeff Conaway's own pocket. We believe Jeffrey Ross Ackerman helped keep the late actor Jeffrey Conaway from being paid in his musical career, in contrast to Mr. Conaway's involvement in Grease. Mr. Conaway had become friends with John Gray during the Men in Black production, through Barry Fay, who was also cut out of all royalties. Mr. Conaway also asked that John Gray give the proof of concept video to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson at Universal at the same time that Dan Povenmire asked the same question of John Gray to give the video on behalf of Barry Fay to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson. Due to Mr. Ackerman's financial involvement, the Men in Black franchise has since grossed approximately $2 billion worldwide while Mr. Ackerman has benefited while having impacted Mr. Fay and Mr. Conaway, who became like a broken step on some cheap Werner latter. According to California state SEC records filed in 1992, under cover of counsel, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, who was financially in charge of Monopoly Studios for the Men in Black proof of concept produced in the sound stages, at 1150 South La Brea Avenue, in Hollywood, California, and Mr. Ackerman was a financial manager for this brilliant Ponzi tax fraud that defrauded the original programming developers out of all financial residuals as well, violating 26 U.S. Code Section 7201 for the franchise Men in Black, owing a percentage of the residuals derived since release in 1997. We the animators, some considered fanatics, completely blame Mr. Ackerman for taking advantage of Mr. Fay, and Mr. Ackerman made a field of famine for Mr. Fay's organization so fanatical about the prospect of Men in Black so as to completely financially fund the original video produced for the American Film Institute in 1992 out of Mr. Fay's pocket. Mr. Fay, as an investor, with John Gray and Jeff Conaway, including Dan Povenmire, paid and contributed fees for all of the computer and cameras and post equipment used by the original programmers and animators for the Men in Black proof of concept. Mr. Fay was a hero, a real hero, and fees and credits are due and expected. We believe that Mr. Fay was a pivotal and historical entertainment producer, and Mr. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, with Universal Studios development head Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, had fielded Mr. Fay's Hollywood investments into a Ponzi scheme that contributed to Mr. Fay's demise, ultimate bankruptcy, and suicide, as well as a financial demise for those around him regarding the proof of concept produced entitled The Men in Black. Mr. Fay should have been paid for The Men in Black, and something karma is wrong here, and it really hurt Mr. Fay and his friends to be cut out by so many bad actors, which violated SEC regulation, violating Rule 105 of Regulation M and possibly the Werner corporate trusts. We believe the animator Dan Povenmire was denied IMDb credit because of Jeffrey Ackerman's Ponzi investment scheme against Barry Fay in collusion with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson on Men in Black in 1992 and 1993. We believe the animator Jeff Marks was denied IMDb credit because of Jeffrey Ackerman's Ponzi investment scheme against Barry Fay in collusion with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson on Men in Black in 1992 and 1993. We believe the animator Shant Jordan was denied IMDb credit because of Jeffrey Ackerman's Ponzi investment scheme against Barry Fay in collusion with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson on Men in Black in 1992 and 1993. We believe that the American Film Institute was cut out of royalties due to Jeffrey Ackerman's Ponzi investment scheme against Barry Fay, in collusion with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson on the Men in Black franchise in 1992 and 1993, still to this day. We also believe cartoon and original comic book creator Lowell Cunningham would have been paid better royalties if not for Jeffrey Ross Ackerman's negative involvement as investment manager in the Men in Black proof of concept produced by Mr. Fay and exploited by Nina Rose Gray Jacobson in 1992 until current. Mr. Ackerman's role in Men in Black devastated his entire investment team and family trusts, all who has losses to this day from the Men in Black franchise as original coders, producers, artists, and developers, with all hopes lost to receive even 1 penny since Hollywood production and all theaters such as Regal and venues such as Staples have shut down, officially ending the Men in Black production franchise during COVID-19 prayer. The original investors and animators of the Men in Black franchise demand that investment manager Jeffrey Ross Ackerman and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson get the original founders of the Men in Black paid back and credited for their original investment into the Men in Black franchise. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman is also free to attend Los Angeles Superior Court, tentatively scheduled for March 2021, to examine Mr. Barry Fay, ASCAP, the American Film Institute, Jeff Conaway's Van Nuys estate, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, and Barry's other friends who had instrumental original roles in the Men in Black franchise pilot. Hear ye, the fans of the spirits of Barry Fay and Jeff Conaway and all artist animators involved in the 1992 Men in Black pilot demand an intellectual property rights litigation in a federal civil court for complete transparency, in 2021 per SEC Regulation Rule 105 of Regulation M. Mr. Fay was introduced to Jeffrey Ross Ackerman by Barry Fay's old friend, John Gray, in approximately 1981. Mr. Fay, being familiar with the ancient family trusts involved, together, Mr. Fay worked with Mr. Ackerman, and they paid and gifted Mr. Fay's friend John Gray, specifically to present to his second cousin, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, the Men in Black prototype, specifically to give Nina Rose Gray Jacobson at Universal Studio a copy of the original prototype on behalf of Barry Fay. And Mr. Ackerman worked for Procter & Gamble in a conflict of interest with Universal Studios' Nina Rose Gray Jacobson and Nina's wife to cut out Mr. Fay's entire investment team, effectively allowing Universal Studio to cheat original investors, like Sir Barry Fay and poor Mr. Conaway. As Mr. Ackerman's genius and corporate greed helped keep Universal Studios from paying original pilot investors of the entire franchise of the Men in Black, helping Universal Studios save hundreds of millions of dollars on residuals from payment to the creators. Bravo, Mr. Ackerman. Up the corporate ladder you go. Financial and health problems ultimately led to Mr. Fay committing suicide, and Mr. Fay committed suicide on Sunday, April 28, 2013, due to financial and health reasons. The psychological and financial loss of investing in the franchise Men in Black without return, due to investment manager Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, ultimately led to the tragic demise of Fay Concert Entertainment Enterprises and their legacy venture with Monopoly Studios to produce the Men in Black franchise. Three, two, one. Those behind the scenes of the Men in Black proof of concept believe Barry Fay's friend and Screen Actor Guild actor Jeff Conaway was a pivotal Hollywood TV and film actor who invested into the Men in Black franchise too, as a Guild actor out of his own pocket, and he also worked for free as an actor in Jeffrey Ross Ackerman's Men in Black investment scheme. Jeff Conaway was an American actor and singer known for playing Kenickie in the movie Grease and for his roles in two American television series, Taxi and Babylon 5. Conaway was also featured in the first and second seasons of the reality television series Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew before he died in 2011. We believe that Screen Actor and ASCAP Music Guild member Jeff Conaway, who also performed in the movie Grease, was a pivotal talent in Hollywood, and he was fielded by Jeff Conaway's friend Mr. Fay, and so their estates are both entitled to music residuals per their agreement to produce Men in Black. We believe that Jeffrey Ross Ackerman worked in a conflict of interest with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson at Universal Studios for McDonald Parks Entertainment to cut out the royalties for Mr. Fay, Jeff Conaway, and all music royalties produced by Will Smith, who also benefited from Mr. Fay and Mr. Conaway's investment with friends, family, and trusts. Additionally, for this 1992 prototype of the Men in Black programming project, Screen Actor Guild member Jeff Conaway worked for free for Jeffrey Ross Ackerman and Universal Studios development headhunter, Nina Gray Rose Jacobson, believing in Jeff Ackerman's goodwill, and, unfortunately, Jeff Conaway was never credited for his role, nor paid in the pilot project for the Men in Black by any investment manager. Ultimately, as reported in the Hollywood trades, it was the loss from Men in Black which then contributed to Mr. Conaway's negative psychological problems, and ultimately led to Mr. Conaway's demise and death by slow suicide in 2011. On behalf of the Screen Actors Guild, and AFTRA, including the guilds BMI, and ASCAP and other music guilds for which Mr. Conaway was a member with his estate, we believe that Mr. Conaway's estate is still entitled to be credited and paid for the work on the pilot for Men in Black for which Mr. Ackerman was the investment manager representing Fay Concert music interests to Universal Studios, with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson. Like his friend Mr. Fay, Mr. Conaway was in the music business, but unlike Mr. Fay, Mr. Conaway was in the original movie, Grease, as a singing artist. As an original financier and actor for the Men in Black proof of concept, Mr. Fay and Mr. Conaway were never credited nor paid, and ultimately it led to Mr. Fay's and Mr. Conaway's sad deaths and demise. According to California tax filings, in 1992, Mr. Fay paid his friend and his former employee John Gray to produce Men in Black for the American Film Institute at the behest of then Simpsons animator Dan Povenmire, as was noted in The Hollywood Reporter, December 1992, during the Men in Black proof of concept production. Barry Fay was the first to give Nina Rose Gray Jacobson a copy of Men in Black produced by the American Film Institute, as he had worked with her already through Universal Studios Music on several of her film productions. Barry Fay then decided to have his employee and friend John Gray give his grandfather, Henry Gray, the Men in Black prototype to give to his grandniece, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, who grew up in Bel Air. Nina Rose Gray Jacobson was head of development at McDonald Parks at Universal Studios, and Barry knew Henry Gray and Nina at the same time and hoped Henry Gray would give Nina a copy of the prototype too. Then by blood, mother, and family, John Gray's grandfather was Henry Gray, and Henry Gray was brother to John Gray's granduncle William Gray, who was Nina Rose Gray Jacobson's biological grandfather. And so it is through tradition and religious holidays that then Hollywood's John Gray gave directly his second cousin the gift of the proof of concept production, Men in Black, produced by Barry Fay and the American Film Institute, which prototype Nina Rose Gray Jacobson put into production at Universal Studios with the help of investment manager Jeffrey Ross Ackerman funding the Men in Black prototype in 1992, which proved to be Barry Fay's biggest career dud, even though his franchise idea made billions of dollars, thanks to Jeffrey Ross Ackerman. Mr. Fay and Mr. Povenmire both believed that Men in Black should be picked up by Universal Studios and made into a theatrical motion picture and asked for John Gray's help as he was related to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, his second cousin who was at Universal Studios in film development at McDonald Parks. Having met Nina Rose Gray Jacobson in the past through Universal Music, Mr. Fay encouraged his employee John Gray, as a third way to solicit to Universal Studios involvement without an attorney with a conflict of interest, as Mr. Fay would work with families on projects, once upon a time in Hollywood, so on behest of Barry Fay, then John Gray also gave for the holidays to his granduncle William Gray, on his mother's side, a copy of the American Film Institute Men in Black prototype proof of concept you see published as film history on YouTube now. Mr. Fay solicited to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson multiple attempts to get Universal Studios involved in the Men in Black franchise, which he paid to produce. William Gray, John Gray's granduncle, a Beverly Hills, California dentist, then gave Men in Black to his granddaughter who still is Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, and who was in 1992 and 1993 head of development at Universal Studios in Hollywood, California. Nina Rose Gray Jacobson is very influenced in her work for the ancient London Gray family for which she is an ancestor and influences the name of her company. John Gray told animator Dan Povenmire that it is well known within the Gray family, which Mr. Fay was aware, that both John Gray and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson were related to the infamous Hollywood actor, Charles Gray, who was credited in the movies with Sean Connery, You Only Live Twice, and Diamonds Are Forever. Regardless, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson then released the theatrical film, entitled The Men in Black through Universal Studios in 1997 with her company McDonald Parks, completely cutting the original developers out of any interests. Ultimately, being a shady investment manager undermining Sir Barry Fay's Men proof of concept, for the Men in Black prototype investment, Jeffrey Ackerman then sabotaged Mr. Fay's agreement on behalf of Universal Studios development headhunter, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson against Barry Fay's interests and specifically against Mr. Fay's partners to produce the Men in Black proof of concept. 4, 3, 2, 1, Mr. Ackerman's Procter & Gamble position, and cross-promotional conflicts of interest, were due to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson's position in Hollywood, at Universal Studios who worked with Procter & Gamble, and Barry Fay as a concert promoter, who had well-known hostile agreements with Universal Music Group. Mr. Fay and his employees for the Men in Black pilot were constantly under sabotage and attack during production by Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, as was witnessed by producers Dan Povenmire, producer Jeffrey Mark, producer Shant Jordan, and actor Jeff Conaway, together during an incident where a bug bomb was set off during rehearsal, by Richard Rosenthal, forcing the production group to leave the building at 7 p.m. at night on approximately September 16, 1992 as a form of harassment, all coordinated by Universal Studio development headhunter, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson. Nina Rose Gray Jacobson intentionally manipulated Erector Set Studio and Monopoly Studio manager Richard Rosenthal to have Mr. Fay's employee, Mr. John Gray, physically assaulted in Hollywood at the Erector Set Monopoly Studio. Because of Jeffrey Ross Ackerman's acquiescence, Universal Studios was allowed to steal Mr. Fay's entire investment of the Men in Black franchise from Fay Entertainment after beating up Barry Fay's employees and creating a smokescreen by a person of power. Through Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, the Werner Corporate Trust was working with the Teamsters Union, who also had a problem with Mr. Fay, and Mr. Fay did not know that Mr. Ackerman was representing the Werner Corporate Trusts, and so Mr. Fay had multiple devious unknown conflicts of interests as he was cut out of Men in Black by bad actors who did not want to pay Mr. Fay nor Mr. Conaway. That in 1992, as investment manager involved with his clients, and clients' families, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, through the main branch of Los Angeles Kabbalah, was involved with Nina Rose Gray Jacobson at the same time, involved at the same time as the Men in Black pilot, and we complain that this is profound even until today. Several months after Barry Fay provided the gifts brought to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson the Men in Black prototype, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson had Barry Fay's agent, the Mr. John Gray, taken out in a coup, Hollywood style, and had the studio head Mr. Richard Rosenthal assault John Gray, who beat John Gray up and gave him a black eye in 1992 during the Men in Black production in the back lot of the studio, in order to steal control of the Men in Black project and force out Mr. Fay's production company from the Hollywood studio, and it worked. In 1992, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like Gangster, Gangster Bling, 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 to take control of Men in Black from the original investors, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman had Mr. Fay's agent John Gray physically beat up, physically removed, and gave the production of Men in Black over to Nina Rose Gray Jacobson at Universal Studios by force. Mr. Fay's rights were removed by physical force under Jeffrey Ross Ackerman's signature as investment manager for Barry Fay's pilot project. Nina Rose Gray Jacobson had Jeffrey Ross Ackerman and studio head Richard Rosenthal physically beat up Mr. Fay's employee, John Gray, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right in front of Dan Povenmire's musical band Keep Left during the Men in Black pilot production, and it sent shock waves through the production as the Men in Black pilot cast witnessed the power play. After Barry Fay and his agents were removed from the South La Brea Hollywood studio at the end of the Men in Black production, Nina Rose Gray Jacobson later installed Disney into the same 1150 South La Brea Hollywood studio under lease, and put the actor Johnny Depp and Chinese stunt coordinator Eric Chen in to run the studio as a pet project, while Nina was president at Buena Vista Motion Pictures at Walt Disney Corporation. We believe Mr. Ackerman continues to receive a Kabbalah-type consideration from Nina Rose Gray Jacobson to divert franchise royalties claimed and owed to the original developers, programmers, cartoon artists, and families in a hunger-type backstabbing game, for which Nina and Jeff are both well known. We call out and complain about Jeffrey Ross Ackerman, investment manager, with incompetence and breach of fiduciary responsibility which to this day has violated his agreements with the group of investors, programmers, computer coders, artists, actors, and musicians originally involved with Monopoly Studio, Erector Set Studio, and their respective guilds mentioned hereto, and which papers hold Mr. Ackerman's signature at the California Secretary of State from 1992 and 1993, effect of the 1872 codes heading added by Stats, 1951, ch. 655, in conjunction with sections 23 to 23.6. In the world-famous words of Homer Simpson, Marge, it takes two to lie, and one to listen. By kowtowing to Universal Studios and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson, Jeffrey Ross Ackerman sowed Mr. Barry Fay's fate and also Jeff Conaway's fate to be cut out of Men in Black forever to this day, so no investor got paid because of the so brilliant investment manager, Jeffrey with the last name initial A. We are holding Mr. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson accountable by this animated class action complaint, and we pray for residuals and credit to those parties below, and that Mr. Jeffrey Ross Ackerman and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson be relieved by the SEC and their respective professional organizations due their involvement with violations of Title 18 U.S.C. Section 95 and 17 U.S. Code Section 501, infringement of copyright, and lastly U.S.C. Title 18, Section 1961 for racketeering. We are providing up to 3 weeks for Mr. Ackerman and Nina Rose Gray Jacobson and their respective investment groups to respond to the entities below. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.